This is the Canon 70-200mm IS II USM. I think anyone who does photography or video shooting professionally either has this lens or has it on their wish list, or at least have used it a lot of times. And so it's one of my absolute favorite lenses. It has a great focal length. 70-200 is indeed very useful when shooting either, well, people, buildings, sports. So I use it a lot of times. If it wasn't so heavy, I would carry it with me all the time. It's sharp. It's one of the sharpest zoom lenses that, it's probably the sharpest zoom lens, this focal length, that I've used. It's obviously sharper at f4 than f2.8, but then again, any lens is sharper at 4 than wide open. I find this to be quite a heavy lens. It's about 1.5 kilos. And obviously when you're using such a light camera like this one, the center of gravity is up here. So I always mount it. I'm very thankful that it has a tripod mount ring to mount the tripod directly onto the lens, as I'm afraid that it would, the mount here would break if I put the tripod straight onto the camera. It has autofocus and manual focus. I don't find the autofocus working great together with the Metabones adapter on the Sony cameras, so I tend to just use manual focusing. The stabilizer on this lens is amazing. I mean, people say that it makes the tripod obsolete. I don't quite agree with that. It is still, if you're using this with 200 on a monopod, or like I am using it now, I still think that it gets a bit, well, it's good with the stabilizer, but you still really need to try and keep it steady. But I basically always use the stabilizer on unless I have it on a very steady tripod and intend to keep it like that. It has two modes, 1 and 2. I almost always have this on 1. 1 is both horizontal and vertical. 2 is good when you're panning and you don't need the vertical stabilizer, as that might then work against your panning. I mean, panning with this lens, I still feel like I need a tripod. I don't feel like this setup is perfect, even though using the stabilizer and having it pretty steady with my hip jib and my little tripod, but panning either horizontal or vertical with this on 200mm, I definitely need a tripod. The vignetting on this one I don't notice too much. I don't think it's disturbing at all. It's a pretty contrasty lens, which I think is alright. I usually shoot flat anyway, so it doesn't bother me that it's a little bit of extra contrast. The color is really nice, the color that comes out of this lens. Always like the color of basically all Canon lenses. I do think that this lens has a lot of focus breathing, meaning that the image changes size after where you're focusing. So if your focus is close or if it's far away. I've done some time lapses with this lens where I keep focus shifting in the time lapse, and that doesn't work so well with the focus breathing. So for me, I mean, I think that's a little bit of a problem, but unless you're doing time lapses and you keep focus shifting, it shouldn't be a huge issue. So there's a focus limiter on this, which is you can switch it from either 1.2mm or 2.5. Now the only reason you would keep it and not use the whole length from 1.2mm but use it on 2.5 would be if you know that your subject is far away and you don't want the lens, if you're using autofocusing for instance, you don't want the lens to get confused and suddenly start focusing on something that happens to come up closer to you. But I usually shoot things that are quite far away from me, so I tend to use this quite a bit. Also, I mean, it says 1.2, obviously this is not a macro lens. I mean, the main reason why I use this one is it's a great focal length and it's f2.8. And it also has a 77mm diameter, which is quite a normal size. So it fits well with my 77mm ND filter. This is quite an expensive lens. It's a lens that I don't own myself. I rent it a lot of times, but it is industry standard for the shoots that I do. I know that this lens will do the job in terms of I like the colors that it will give me. I like that it is sharp. Even at f2.8 it is sharp, and I actually find this one sharper at f2.8 than the other Canon 7200 f4. So I find this one sharper at 2.8 than the f4 is wide open at f4. And it just gives beautiful images. Like my colleague said, this lens makes anything look beautiful, basically. So you can point at anything from afar and make it look nice, and so much nicer than it would with a lot of other lenses. But it's also a heavy lens, so I always have to think twice when I pack my kit, especially if I'm flying. If I can take this lens, and if I will use it enough for it to be worth the effort and not sort of carrying it around as an extra weight most of the time. Because of the stabilizer, it works really well with monopods or sort of rig, or the way I use it now with the hip jib, in which I've placed this little Sure tripod. This is really how I use this lens the most, and it's not handheld, but it's almost handheld, and it gives sort of a handheld feel. So together with the stabilizer and the lens, I find this a pretty optimal way of working.